the music dies away, we welcome you back to the final Religious Studies Project podcast of this academic year, 2015-2016. We'll be coming back in September, of course, with the new 2016-17 season. I'm Christopher Cotter, and I'm joined by, as ever,
David Robertson. And what have we got coming up this week?
Well, this week we've got Martin Lepage speaking with Mark Juergensmeyer on globalized religion and the study of religious tensions. And this was recorded at the Eastern International Meeting of the American Academy of Religion in Pittsburgh a couple of months ago. So we'll hand over to Martin.
I am here today at the Eastern International Region meeting of the American Academy of Religion in Pittsburgh. I am with Professor Mark Juergensmeyer. Professor, hi. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Juergensmeyer is the founding director of the Orfila Center for Global and International Studies. You are an affiliate professor in sociology, religious studies, and global studies at UC Santa Barbara. Some of our other auditors might be familiar with you from the interview that you gave a couple of years ago on sociotheology and cosmic war in with the RSP. You are an expert on religious violence, conflict resolution, and South Asian religion. Today we're going to talk about religion and globalization in general, but we're going to also speak about your research in general as well. Let's just dive into it with a simple but maybe complicated question. What is globalization, and maybe more specifically, what is global religion?
Wonderful question. Globalization, of course, is not what you narrowly think of, simply an extension of kind of economic, American Western-style economic hegemony over the rest of the world. Unfortunately, that's one aspect, but it's simply the transnational and transcultural intersection of ideas, economies, politics, society, ideologies, stuff. And it's been going on forever. I mean, there is a history of global interaction. One of the most globalized periods in history was the ancient Mediterranean world, for example, the birthplace of Christianity, in part because it was a global religion. I mean, Buddhism developed as a global religion. And so in many ways, religious studies is probably the most global of disciplines within the university, because religion has, by its character, always been a global phenomenon. So whatever aspect of religiosity and spirituality one is concerned about, whether it's textual studies, whether it's the social or anthropological aspects of religion, they've always had a transcultural and transnational character. But I think there is a subject called global religion. And that's, to me, I think one of the most promising and interesting areas of the future of the field of religious studies. That we know what world religion is, and it's in some ways discredited, and for good reasons. Because in the 1950s, when academia seemed to blossom with its interest in other cultural parts of the world, at least in America and increasingly in Europe, it was in part for political reasons. It was part to try to, because the promotion of trying to understand, particularly the Third World during the era of the Cold War, and how to understand and infiltrate, the minds of people in other regions. So there were scholarships given. I myself was a beneficiary of the largesse that allowed me to study Hindi in order to study Indian religion in graduate school through a government scholarship. Got me all the way through graduate school. So comparative religion became a kind of dominant motif, and no field of religious studies would be without an introduction to world religion. And that's often still the case. But increasingly, religious studies faculties rebel against not only teaching a course which they feel ill-equipped to teach, and of course, all of us are ill-equipped to teach all of us are ill-equipped to teach any introductory course, almost by nature. That's not the way we think, at least as a research agenda for religious studies. But unfortunately, our students entering the field want to enter at a level that meets their somewhat simplistic questions and responds to their interest about the rest of the world. But it's been discredited not only because it's hard to teach, but because it just seems both intellectually and pedagogically unsound to use one cookie-cutter approach to look at all forms of religiosity throughout the world, as if there was a single thing called religion that existed exactly the same way in every culture in every part of the globe. And we know that's not the case, and we feel dishonest intellectually and somewhat irresponsible pedagogically when we're asked to teach a course in world religion. Those are all good reasons. But I think to try to understand the intersection of religious traditions and cultures globally, and to think in terms of global religion, is a different agenda. And by that I mean not only respecting the diversity of forms of religiosity around the world, but also focusing on the way in which traditions and cultures and communities have intersected through time, over time and in space, in ways that really knit together into kind of a global tapestry of religious history. And I think to study that and to teach that is a very interesting and promising agenda indeed. I myself teach a course on global religion, and the way I teach it, I'm teaching it right now, in fact, with a colleague of mine, the chair of the Religious Studies Department at Santa Barbara. And the way Kathy and I teach this course is every week we focus on a different religious tradition. And so it does have a little bit of that, if it's Tuesday, it must be Taoism, kind of character of the old religion course. But we look at, let's say, Islam, which is the subject this last week, in terms of its global character, the degree to which it's always been not just a local, regional religious tradition, but one that has intersected, it has expanded and intersected with other traditions around the world, and today is a vibrant part of the cultural tapestry of European society, American society, certainly South and Southeast Asia society, which, by the way, is where the majority of the world's Muslims live, and not the Middle East. That's our kind of fantasy to think all Muslims are like Saudi Arabia, which is such a small minority part of the whole Islamic tradition. If you want to see real Muslims, you should go to Indonesia or Bangladesh, Pakistan, where most of the Muslims live. China, there are more Muslims in China than Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. So to understand this and understand its diversity is part of the mission of this introductory lecture. And then the second meeting, we go out and actually experience some aspect of that globalized tradition. We go to the Islamic Center of Southern California, for example.
Right.
And the Islamic Center of Southern California in LA is a wonderful place because it is the Islamic Center. It's a mosque, but it's one of the most diverse Islamic communities I've ever been to. There's a sizable black Muslim constituency, a lot of Pakistanis, a lot of Turks. It's just and a lot of kind of Western Euro-Americans, people we call Caucasian, who have converted to Islam. It's just a very interesting globalized mix. And it fits into one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the world, Los Angeles, in an easy and understandable way. So, and then we also look at new religious traditions. We look at Scientology, for example. We look at the Celebrity Center of Scientology to try to understand how globalization produces new forms of religiosity, new characteristics of religious culture, and then talk about at least in one session, the religiosity of the non-religious religiosity, the religion of nuns, the people who are increasing, and by that I mean not the ladies on the bus, those nuns, not the NUNS, but the NONES, the people who, when asked to declare their religious affiliation, do not check, Methodist or Catholic or Jewish, but they also don't check atheist or agnostic. They check none.
Right.
Well, that's interesting.
It is.
Because what that signals is a kind of a sensibility, which they will describe as spirituality. They're spiritual, they're not religious.
That whole spiritual but not religious kind of way to identify in a religious spectrum.
Right, and it is a religious sensibility. It does fit on that spectrum. And these are probably most of my students. They're people who are interested in religion. They think religion is a valuable repository of something rich and deep and beautiful in the world's religious traditions. But they don't feel that they have to be exclusively tied to any of them. They can savor and appreciate all of them. So it seems to me that this is a mark of our current era of globalization. And this is what I'm getting around. The other point I'm getting around to is not just to see global religion as an aspect of religious traditions, but also a new form of religiosity that's a part of our contemporary experience. That we are kind of like, as Bob Bella talked about, national societies as containing a civil religion. In some ways, there's a kind of global civil religion. A global civil religion for a global civil society is increasingly, there is a sense, particularly in multicultural communities, the globalization that takes place in Los Angeles and Montreal and in globalized cities everywhere. This experience of being not just akin to one's neighbor and their different culture, but in some ways an inheritor of it, to appreciate for oneself the complexity of culture. It seems to me that's the step beyond multiculturalism. Maybe it's transculturalism. I don't know what it is. And it's a new religiosity. It's not exactly a lowest common denominator religion. That's one way of thinking about global religion. It's not something that negates religious traditions or the histories of faiths. In some ways, it admires and elevates them, but does not cordon them off as if they were the province of only one people and one community. They are a part of the world's cultural heritage.
Yes.
So I think we are emerging into an era of global civil society. That's the optimistic part of our present. If we can get back beyond all of the kind of tribalism of the present, of which you've seen an enormous amount, including, I'm sad to say, in America's own presidential elections. But it's true in every culture. It's the thing that produces the kind of religious violence that I've studied for the last several decades. And I've always thought of this as one response to globalization. That is, one response to the kind of cultural shifts that make everybody available to everyone else in an internet era of instant communication and interaction. One reaction is fear. Reaction is tribalism, the assault on the traditional nation state, the whole idea of nationalism and community being one person with one kind of nation. And now you have in France all these Muslims from the Algeria and the Middle East, and Germany have all these Muslims from Turkey. How do you think of Germany as a traditional community that's supposed to be Christian and is supposed to be, ethnically pure, maybe not in the extreme to which Hitler thought of it, but at least have some kind of integrity. Well, that is a challenge. It's a challenge even in America. It's supposed to be, a nation of immigrants. but it's white European immigrants and a culture that does not seem to any longer privilege white male Christian heterosexual men is threatening to some people. And so you get a kind of dogged xenophobia and tribalism as a response. And the extreme forms, of course, violence. And the expressions of religious violence and terrorism are, from the Christian militia to Al-Qaeda and ISIS are, reflections of this. But there's another side. There's a flip side. And that's the part that we explored to some extent in this recent book, God in the Tumult of the Global Square, which is based on a 6-year Luce Foundation-funded project where we went all over the world, Moscow, Shanghai, Delhi, Cairo, Buenos Aires, to try to kind of gauge the temperature of religion in the 21st century, and in religion in public life. And what we concluded is that there are two sides. One is the destructive side, the religion of tribalization, but there's also the religion, the multicultural, the global religion, the religion of a new multicultural era, the religion that maybe has no name, the religion of the nuns, but really does reflect a kind of growing sense of certainly an ethical and moral dimension, a concern about the environment. Maybe most of all, the kind of threat of global warming and of climate change and the sense of a shared responsibility for the future of this planet. So this is a moral challenge, human rights around the world, whether it's rights for women, rights for minorities, rights for gays. It's something that there's a kind of common sensibility that we need to protect rights for all people. So these kind of common shared themes that cut across all forms of cultural and national boundaries is one aspect of a kind of growing moral consensus. But I think there's also a spiritual side, a sense that there is a deeper sense of reflection and a deeper sense of purpose that unites all people on this planet. Maybe it doesn't take explicit God language or specific theological form, but it's one that intuitively recognizes the value of religious traditions and sees traditional religion as allies rather than as something to be feared or as resources for a new cultural religion. So, I think you see this in the kind of global saints that the world has produced. People like Mother Teresa or Mahatma Gandhi or Bishop Tutu or the Dalai Lama or Pope Francis. They're all people that are admired, not just because they kind of have a moral clarity about them, but also they reflect a spiritual richness, whether they are, and look at them, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, that they reflect a spiritual depth that people resonate with. They say, yes, there's something there. This is part of my religiosity, my spirituality, my morality, even though I'm not specifically, I don't go to church, I don't go to synagogue, I go to a temple, I don't do those things that kind of old-fashioned, more traditional religious people do. But I think it is a part of the religiosity of a coming global religion.
Exactly. In that sense, it speaks a lot about power relations in society, how people deal with the weight of institutions, of religious institutions, and how everyone deals with religious norms, how everyone has some kind of a freedom to act upon their own lives. How do you see, is there some kind of what's your lens exactly in regards to that. You've talked about your recent book about the tumult of the global square, and then we've talked a little bit earlier about your 2008 book, Global Rebellion. Do you see some kind of course, there is, but what is the gist of the continuity between those two books? There is this rebellion, and then there's this tumult. The rebellion is something that might be more individual, as tumult is something that's more of a community thing.
Well, the book, God on the Tumult of the Global Square, includes the kind of rebellion that I focus on in my earlier books, but in a wider frame, not just specifically in movements of political rebellion against traditional authorities, or in the case of the book on terrorism, Terror in the Mind of God, on movements that are innately violent. But I look at the tumult beneath them. Mm-hmm. That is, what is the tumult that produces this? And I discussed this to some extent in the Global Rebellion, the whole kind of challenge of globalization to the nation state, and the fragility of the national idea of nationalism. There is a community, though, enlightenment notion that you can. As Rousseau says, it's a social contract between a people and their government. Well, this assumes that there's a people. This assumes that you know who you're talking about. Well, in the 18th century, that was pretty clear. The French were French, and the Germans were German. Well, they were not quite German. There are all kinds of differences. The Italians were all over the place. But eventually, they kind of, you could get a sense of who they were, and it made sense that you could have a government for those people. Even then, there were problems, as I said. There were groups that felt, well, we're not really a part of them. And of course, Hitler famously thought, there's a Jewish question. There's a problem there. They don't really fit. But in a general sense, it did sort of fit. Never perfectly. Never really fit places like the United States, communities of immigrants. But increasingly, it doesn't fit. And it doesn't fit not just in those traditional societies that are increasingly becoming multicultural, where everybody can live everywhere and do, but also where everyone can be in contact with everybody anytime and do. And so you have extraordinary places like the place I live in, Southern California, which is not only a great American city, it's also one of the largest Filipino cities. Mm-hmm. Just sheer number of Filipinos who live in Los Angeles. One of the largest Iranian cities. Brentwood is called Tehrangeles. There's the sheer number of Persians who live there. That's one of the largest Mexican cities. Mm-hmm. It has a huge Chinese and growing Chinese community, and Thai community, and Middle Eastern community. It's a global city, and they're people who maintain their ties to their relations in their geographic places of origin. But increasingly, these are, as Benedict Anderson once described them, email ethnicities or internet ethnicities. People who are connected online. And so the main kind of power of their communities in cyberspace. Uh-huh. And of course, the younger generations become, they're just American in their cultural attitudes and gestures, and yet they are also multicultural. They also have these connections. One of the guys who was working with me now as a research assistant on the Jihadi project, just as kind of hang loose surfer dude, Southern Californian that you can get, until the subject comes to Palestine, because he's Palestinian, and then he's all over his kind of those ethnic connections and the kind of the importance that has to him. And when he was at Amman, Jordan, ISIS tried to recruit him because they see, this is kind of person who might very well, and some do, and he was intrigued, I have to tell you. He obviously didn't join the movement. You know, he's working with me. But this is part of the complexity of our contemporary culture. And so even though the same dynamics of anti-authoritarianism, of a kind of break from traditional past, whether it's political structures in the nation state or even traditional religious authorities that are part of the past. I mean, a lot of even in the more strident movements are not the old clergy. I mean, if you go to Egypt, the clergy who are in charge of the mosque feel left out of it, because the people are either following like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is non-clerical, has no support whatsoever from the traditional clergy, or these televangelists, the kind of firebrand revivalist Muslim preachers, some of whom have no political agenda whatsoever, and some which do. But in either case, they have no connection with the traditional clergy. That's something we don't understand about a lot of these new movements, including those in Islam. They are as rebellious within their traditions as they are rebellious against like the West and other people they feel who are propping up the dictators of their region. So these are all characteristics of a kind of decentralized, localized, anti-authoritarian characteristic of globalization, when you feel like all the old traditional strictures and lines of authority are breaking down. And that leads to violence, leads to tensions, and the tensions sometimes lead to violence. But it also leads to hope. Because the same thing that breaks down old structures and leaves decay also leaves a promise of hope, a promise of future, of the building of new things and of new kind of connections and relationships. And that's the other part that we explore in this most recent book, God in the Tumult of the Global Square, and where Bob Bella, whom I mentioned in the civil religion, came to help us. He's an old friend of mine. We worked together at Berkeley for years when I was director of the religious studies program there, and he was chair of my advisory committee. So after finishing a book on religion and human evolution, he came down from Berkeley and spent some time with us in Santa Barbara and thinking through this project and the whole issue of whether there can be a religion, a global civil society. And typically, Bob doesn't just kind of comment, he writes essays. And he wrote a wonderful essay for us, which I summarized in one chapter of this book, God in the Tumult of the Global Square, and is one of his last essays. Tragically, he died just a few months later of a hard situation. But that essay is one of the most optimistic of essays of anything that I've read of Bella, who's not an optimist. I mean, he's a pessimist by nature. He's like an Old Testament prophet. He has a very dismal view of the human condition, particularly American politics and politicians in general. He once described Nixon as, in a nation of the crooks, the chief crook is president. He kind of summarizes his point of view. And he has very dire prognosis for humans as a society in the face of global warming and climate change. He wonders whether we're, as a species, we're really going to survive this. But he is optimistic about global religion. In the sense that he sees this some aspects of this emerging culture of concern about climate change, about human rights, about our life together on this planet, to have both religious as well as ethical sensibilities that do lead to the kind of Durkheimian notion of a common glue that holds together humanities that he was talking about. In the case of civil religion, for national societies, there can also be a civil religion. For global societies, a global civil religion.
In that context, in that regard, what about authenticity? Is there no more need for authenticity in a religious context? Are we done? with authenticity, whether
Within
it is
religious traditions, you mean?
yes.
No, I don't think so. I mean, one of the things that Bella talks about in his essay is what what he sees is not in this emerging global religion of global civil society is not a watered down lowest common denominator religion, or even in what's it, Esperanto, the language of was kind of a created language.
Was supposed to be the
The
universal.
everybody that was never adapted. But just like language, people keep on speaking different tongues, but they'll be more prone to translate, be more prone to incorporate words from other languages, and they will appreciate the beauty of other languages as a part of their own heritage and their own tradition. And we do that with language, and we do that with art and culture, and I think increasingly with religion. It will not detract from the kind of authenticity of specific religious traditions or specific religious experiences, but it will make them accessible to a global community in a way perhaps that they haven't been before.
You talked a lot about...
I think world religion or comparative religion was a kind of voyeur approach to religious studies. That would, isn't this interesting what those funny people are doing over there? It's a kind of Margaret Mead approach to religiosity. Nothing against Margaret Mead. But I think we've gone beyond that. When I just think of my own classes, when I first started teaching in religious studies at Berkeley, the class was like 80% or 90% white and either Christian or Jewish, and that's not the case anymore, particularly in Southern California. Almost any religious tradition I talk about, there's somebody there who is it, or their mother is it, and and they will correct me if I say something wrong. But more importantly, it's not that they are a bunch of strangers, together looking strangely at each other's faith. They are part of the same Southern California community, and their religious traditions, as different as they are part of that common mix. And that's what's changed. And that really is a shift from kind of a world religion curiosity about other faiths to a global religion appreciation of what is the common heritage that we all have of all religious traditions.
Would this be maybe the gist of your keynote address here at the EIR entitled "Thinking Globally About
this is what I'm
Global Religion"?
What we've been talking about is what I'm talking about this afternoon. Right. It's about the emergence of global religion and how that's a part of the future in a positive way as well as a
very optimistic indeed
negative way.
You've talked about a lot about what happens in cities and about the influence of technology and the internet and so on. But what about people and traditions that take place outside of these urban regions? What about people that are outside of that still have access to the internet?
Well, increasingly, there are not that many people outside of that, or at least potentially outside of that. This kind of cosmopolitanism that I've said is characteristic of global cities is increasingly a part of the global world. This last year, I've been a pioneer in the field of global studies, which is as I've said, an attempt to try to look at aspects of the globalization of not just economies and technologies, but also culture and societies. And I've tried to encourage the creation of global studies programs around the world, kind of a missionary for the global studies. So I was invited last year to go to the University of Sikkim. Now, do you know where Sikkim is?
I do not.
Have you ever heard the word Sikkim?
I haven't.
Okay. Sikkim is a farmer kingdom, a separate little state, high in the Andes, kind of between Nepal and Tibet and India. It's adjacent to Bhutan.
Okay.
And Bhutan and Sikkim were both proudly separate kingdoms. Bhutan still is. Sikkim, through a series of very interesting political upheavals, became merged with India. India basically took it over. But it's still predominantly Buddhist, and it's kind of the Tibetan Buddhism of the region that's kind of contiguous with Tibet and eastern Nepal. So it's about as remote a plot of territory as you can get on the planet. And the Indian government has decided to create a university there. Didn't have a university, so they're going to create a university. They're just forming a new university at Sikkim. And somebody I knew from Delhi, from the JNU, the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, was invited to go to Sikkim. He was, in fact, himself ethnically from that region. Invited to go to Sikkim to be the chancellor, the vice chancellor, which is the same as the head of the president of the university. And in consultation with the local people, they decided to not just have a regular university with all the different branches that universities have, but to have two special schools of focus. One would be on Himalayan studies, which makes perfectly good sense. It's up in the Himalayas, up in the mountain, and their connections with Tibet and Burma and China and all these places are very important regionally.
Yes.
But the other school was global studies. And he wanted the Sikkim University, arguably in the remotest spot on the planet, to be global in its outlook and its character. So I was invited to go to Sikkim University to be the keynote speaker for the first School of Global Studies in the Himalayas. And I had to take a small plane from Delhi. It landed in a tea plantation near Darjeeling. And then a Jeep met me. And then for 5 hours, we went through a torturous mountain passes up to, Sikkim, which kind of sits perched on a peak in a canyon in 12,000 feet foothills of the Himalayan mountains with the huge scenery of the Himalayas in the background. And to a group that was eagerly embracing the field of global studies, because they intuitively sensed that the future of any region, including one that's as distant and as remote as Sikkim, has to embrace not only its region and its characteristic, but the global world into which all people are coming. Everybody had a cell phone. Everybody had internet.
Yeah.
Everybody was online. They may have been in Sikkim, but they were part of the global world.
Interesting. How is that? How do these phenomena pertain to the future of religious studies per se? How does globalization and the shift from the world religion paradigm to another paradigm will help further the discipline of religious studies as an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary?
I think it relates to religious studies in two ways. It gives new stuff to study. There are whole new phenomena emerging that are interesting and worthy of research and study. And my own university, at the religious studies department, just hired on a new person to focus on secularism and on non-traditional religiosity. Religion of nuns, for example. And I have graduate students who are working on that field, are looking at the universal life church, the one that people join in order to perform weddings. for like $10, send in your your money, and you can become a minister in the Universal Life Church. Well, it's kind of a sham in a sense, but it's also more than that. I mean, there are a lot of people who are Universal Life ministers who take seriously the idea that they are ministers, that they are, expressing their own religion, or a religion that they feel intuitively about them. And the rites of marriage that they perform are interesting in themselves. And as somebody, in my case, I'm ordained, so I perform weddings, but in many cases, working with young people who want to get married, but not in a traditional religious way. And so we work together to create kind of rites that express not just the significance of their union, but the significance of the kind of community of which they're part, and the spiritual significance of the event. It's very interesting because, we are in a sense fascinating. We're fascinating new forms of religion. Oh, I should tell you, the class project of our course on global religion, the thing that everybody has to do at the end of the class instead of an exam, create your own religion.
Oh.
So they have to, in teams of 4 or 5, they have to get together, and they have to, and sometimes it's kind of a spoof, it's a kind of, the religion of consumerism, the religion of Beyonce has been a popular religion. But in other cases, the attempt to try to, there's religion of water, and seeing water as the thing that connects all life, for example. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these are interesting ways of trying to think in fresh eyes about religiosity in non-traditional atmosphere. So that's a whole new arena to study. So that's one way in which global religion, I think, is a boon to religious studies. But I think in another way, everything that we have always done in religious studies has been global. And I give you for instance, one of the first, in our Department of Global Studies in Santa Barbara, one of the first positions we had went through an endowed chair, a fellow who wanted to promote Sikh studies. So I said, well, let's do this in the context of religious studies. So it's the position in Sikh and religious studies. And the idea is that scholar we had, who has a wonderful job through most of the 15 years that we've developed the program, is a textual scholar. He does the textual history of Sikh tradition, which you can think is about as narrow and as specific and as non-global as you can get. It's like, somebody who specializes in Deuteronomy, or, the second letter of John in the New Testament as what does that have to do with global studies? Well, everything, as it turns out, because the emergence of the Sikh tradition was one of a kind of cultural interaction. Some of the early stories about Nanak is how he traveled around the world. Whether or not he really traveled around the world is kind of contested, but nonetheless, that's part of the collected received wisdom of the tradition. And so from the very beginning, as a tradition, even 500 years old, both the text and the history are a part of intersecting cultures and interacting traditions that move beyond the kind of confines of any specific regional and certainly national limitations. So the way we don't have to study global religion, we can study religion globally. And to think globally about the way we come to our the phenomena that is our subjects of study, in order to bring out the richness of the context in which these phenomena occurred and the diversity of their significance beyond any particular small community of which they may be a part. So that's, I think, is the challenge, and has been part of religious studies from the beginning.
Right. How do you think that this is going to change the ways in which religious studies are taught? How do you think that this is going to change the way we teach it?
Well, already, as I say, Santa Barbara no longer teaches world religion, but they teach global religion. And it's in part because I started teaching it, but not in the religious studies department in global studies. But now, Kathy Moore, who's chair of religious studies, is taking it on as a course within religious studies. And I hope that she will continue teaching it even if I no longer teach it, and it will become a part of the curriculum. So I think certainly as a field of studies, it is something that students are interested in. It does respond to their natural curiosity about how other religious traditions are, without lapsing into the old comparative religion, world religion template of one cookie cutter fits all religious traditions, and enables the teacher to explore intellectually the kind of diversity and diversity of religious culture and the interaction of traditions in a way that's fun for them also. I've taught introductory courses a lot in my teaching career, and I found them intellectually some of the most satisfying courses to teach, precisely because they do require you to kind of weave together a narrative, a common story about human history and human culture. That's challenging, but it's really, really intellectually satisfying and exciting to do. And so I encourage people not to shy away from such courses or feel like they're a burden. Of course, they're a burden because they're a challenge. They're, something that it's not in your comfort zone for many people. But it can probably be one of the most rewarding courses you'll ever teach.
All right, I think that we're done. Did you have anything to add?
No, it's fine. It was fun talking with you.
Thank you.
Another excellent interview there from Martin, and thanks to Mark Juergensmeyer as ever.
So some other people we should say thanks to are the BASR, the British Association for the Study of Religions, and
The NAASR, the North American Association for the Study of Religion. Our generous sponsors.
They bring the RSP to you. So
yeah,
many thanks.
It's you who should be thanking them, listener, because they fund us to provide this wonderful free service for you.
It's true. I interrupted David there earlier when I jumped in with that extra thanks. So what were you going to say, David?
Not at all. I was just going to make some terrible joke about how this was recorded in Pittsburgh and we were recording the introduction in Edinburgh, a Scotsman, an Irishman, it's going to be edited, in Canada. And it's a piece about international globalization, and we are increasingly a global enterprise.
And as this podcast is going out, you'll be wending your way to Helsinki for the European Association for the Study of Religions conference, and hopefully will you be speaking to the executive committee?
I will be presenting the Religious Studies project to the executive committee at their meeting, looking for not money in this case, but just a bit of mutual support and recognition.
So hopefully
helping us to bring more scholars from mainland Europe that we've struggled to get because we can't afford to travel there all the time, obviously. So that's the idea.
And so we hope to have more news on that for you when we come back in September.
Indeed.
But just because we're taking a break from producing new podcasts, that doesn't mean that the RSP is going to go quiet over the summer. You might have heard about a certain book called After World Religions, Reconstructing Religious Studies, co-edited by Cotter and Robertson, Routledge 2016. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of it, but do you know what I would like, Chris? I would like to be able to hear some of the contributors talking about these kind of ideas before I buy any, book. Although it is quite reasonably priced.
It is for an academic text, actually, I must say. So over the summer, we're going to be posting to social media our podcasts with contributors to After World Religions. So you can look forward to how we're going to do this. We've got Jim Cox, Steve Sutcliffe, Stephen Ramey,
Russell McCutcheon, Dominic Corey-Wright, Carol Cusack,
Brad Stoddard, Craig Martin,
yeah,
Temu Terra,
yeah. I think we've got Suzanne Owen. I think we've got all of them, haven't we?
and Dave McConaughey.
Dave McConaughey, yeah.
I hope we haven't missed anyone out there. That was a risky guess.
Yeah, and all the others, of course. So yeah, we'll be posting one of those up every week. But that's, part of the summer break is to give you a chance to, I know that it's not always possible to listen to every podcast that you subscribe to every week. So this gives you a couple of months to catch up and, dive into our archive, because we do have quite an extensive archive now. I think we're
approaching 200.
This one is at 190.
Wow.
But that's the numbered ones. There are several that don't have numbers.
Bonus ones.
So I think we're actually past 200 now.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to bringing you that archive over the summer. And as we said, we'll be posting it on social media. So do follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube if you're not already. And
iTunes.
yeah. And don't forget about our Amazon links.
But thanks for listening.
Major thanks.
Yeah.
All the thanks.
Big up.
Thanks.